So guys, today I want to do a video on some of the differences in the actual recovery from anabolic steroids and how different classes of steroids have very different recovery profiles. I work with a lot of men across the world who will come often for help regarding PCT. They're looking to come off and restore their natural levels through a properly designed post-cycle therapy. In this video, I'm going to discuss the various reasons as to why this can be quite complicated, especially if you've used different classes of anabolic steroids. There are three main classes of steroids and their structures and how they interact in the entire cholesterol to testosterone pathway is going to significantly increase your risk of not recovering, or alternatively having men come to me with LH and FSH values extremely low despite being off everything and they're wondering why this is still happening. In this video, I'm going to discuss the exact biological mechanisms as to why this can be the case. So in particular, we're going to delve into the science of steroids and how they suppress your HPT axis and how they're actually interacting with receptors at the pituitary and hypothalamus level in the brain to cause suppression. So anabolic steroids are basically falling into three main classes for the purposes of post-cycle therapy. That is testosterone-based or testosterone-derived anabolic steroids, DHT-derived anabolic steroids, and progestin-based anabolic steroids. And the key point here is that each of these three classes have a different effect on your HPT axis. And basically, this is determining how hard or how suppressed you actually are, or how hard you actually shut down, depending on what compounds you've taken from these classes. So testosterone-based anabolic steroids are things like testosterone enanthate, cypionate, dianabol, boldenone, or equipoise, turinabol, and drugs in that class. Now, drugs in this class can interact with the aromatase enzyme and aromatize and convert into estrogen. So in this class, you're getting suppression of LH or luteinizing hormone from both estrogen and the actual testosterone molecule itself, or the testosterone-derived molecule. And this research paper puts it brilliantly. You get suppression from both testosterone and estradiol or estrogen. Now, these are going to provide that negative feedback to both the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus in the brain, and this is what's inhibiting your LH value. So this is why when you take these compounds, you're seeing your LH value on your blood work at basically 0 or 0.1 because you are centrally suppressed at the brain level. But I'm going to delve into the science here more fully later in this video, but LH suppression in this way through either estrogen or testosterone can recover quicker than other forms of suppression, which I'll go into. DHT-based steroids are things like Anavar, Winstrol, Masteron, Primo, DHT itself, obviously, Proviron, Anadrol, even though Anadrol has a few unique properties that aren't strictly DHT based. But these are the compounds of drugs that are DHT based. And this is why often a lot of these drugs are very bad for hair loss or balding, because DHT being the primary hair follicle miniaturizer, these compounds are going to be very harsh on your hair. And we see this anecdotally on Reddit and the forums, that DHT-based drugs are very bad for your hair loss. But they don't aromatize or convert into estrogen at all. So you're actually getting less estrogen-mediated suppression. And a lot of people are surprised to learn that E2 itself can suppress your HPT axis as well as testosterone. So it's not just the androgens, but E2 can also suppress LH and FSH, which are your gonadotropins. It can suppress those levels as well. And so you do get suppression at the pituitary and the hypothalamus with DHT-based compounds. Again, it's going to be that central suppression from the brain, so you're not getting LH or FSH in a pulsatile fashion to produce testosterone. And so yes, you will be suppressed if you take, like, for example, an Anavar-only cycle. You're still going to be suppressed, but will you be able to bounce back a little quicker? Probably yes, considering the half-life and considering you're not getting the estrogen receptor-mediated suppression as well. Now, the last class of steroids, and what is the most extremely suppressive drugs in terms of all of the anabolic steroids, are the progestin-based steroids. The examples are not going to surprise you. These are the ones that are going to shut you down the hardest and for the longest. These are Trenbolone, Nandrolone or Deca, and Ment or Tresolone to a certain extent as well. But Nandrolone, Trenbolone are the key players here. And the reason they're so suppressive is that these drugs directly bind to progesterone receptors in the brain. And this suppresses GnRH, which is a step higher than LH and FSH. So basically your brain will be stimulated to produce gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is GnRH. That then tells the anterior pituitary to produce LH and FSH, which is at this level. But if the step higher, which is GnRH, is blocked completely, you're getting absolutely no communication there and you are getting a full suppression of LH and FSH totally. For example, in this study from 1996, they found that Nandrolone binds to progesterone receptors with nearly a 5 times greater affinity than androgen receptors. Now, it is this really strong progesterone receptor binding that is resulting in an 80% suppression of LH within 4 weeks. But what is most concerning is that the suppression levels were still over 60% up to 6 months later. The study also showed that Nandrolone's binding affinity for the androgen receptor was nearly 10 times lower than testosterone's, meaning its suppression is through progesterone receptor activation rather than actually interacting with the androgen receptor like the testosterone-based steroids and the DHT-based steroids. And studies have also gone on to find that things like Nandrolone can drop LH levels over 80% within 4 weeks of administration, which isn't a massive surprise. All of these steroids are going to suppress you to some extent. But what is most concerning for this class is that you're getting suppression up to 9 months post-injection, which I'll go into later, the reason as to why that's happening. So as you can see, progestin-based steroids are going to be the hardest to recover from and are going to shut your HPT axis down a lot. So for example, why is Trenbolone so suppressive? As it is part of this class because of the progesterone receptor activation. Trenbolone is strongly binding to the progesterone receptors in the brain, directly blocking GnRH and directly blocking LH release. This study found that progesterone receptors in the hypothalamus regulate GnRH suppression more strongly than androgen receptors in the pituitary. So, whereas androgen receptors in the pituitary gland still have a say on how much suppression you're going to have eventually, so they still will have, a big part to play in your LH and FSH levels on the blood work, the research is showing that progesterone receptors in the hypothalamus regulate gonadotropin releasing hormone more strongly than anything binding to the androgen receptors. And because Trenbolone and Nandrolone bind to these receptors at 5 times greater affinity than anything DHT or testosterone based, you're getting a complete shutdown of GnRH pulsatility, which is that pulsatile fashion that you see in GnRH throughout the day in natural men. You're getting a complete shutdown of this, so it's not actually telling your brain at all to produce LH, FSH, that then travels down to the testicles to produce natural testosterone through the Leydig cell interaction, but you're not getting that at all with the GnRH being completely ablated. And if we actually look at what's happening here, progesterone receptors are densely packed in the arcuate nucleus, which is a key region for the GnRH pulsatile fashion, and any GnRH is really being generated from there in the body. So even small amounts of progestin-based anabolic steroids can significantly suppress you. Even if estrogen is low, you're going to get this massive suppression through things like Trenbolone and Nandrolone because of the PR or progesterone receptor interaction. Not only this, but Nandrolone, for example, and Trenbolone to a certain extent as well, they're not just acting on the progesterone receptors, but they're staying in your system for so long. I'm working with men who have come off heavy cycles of Tren or Nandrolone, and they're still wondering why 1 month later, they're still having, zero basically LH, and they're still massively suppressed. It's because the metabolites of Trenbolone and Nandrolone seem to hang around a lot longer than testosterone and DHT-based steroids. In this study, they found that a metabolite of Nandrolone was still detectable in urine samples 9 months after just one single 150 milligram injection. 9 months later, they were still finding metabolites of Nandrolone in your system. And not just in 1 or 2 test subjects, but in 45% of the people. 9 months later, there were still metabolites of androgenic anabolic steroids in your system from a Nandrolone injection, just one single injection. So you can imagine a heavy cycle, you're gonna be dealing with those metabolites for a long period of time that are interacting potentially with the progesterone receptors and suppressing you. And if we wind back the clock to 6 months, 83% of subjects still had metabolites of Nandrolone in their system. So this is just reinforcing the idea that Nandrolone and Trenbolone are going to have metabolites that stay around for a long period of time, and you're going to get prolonged suppression effects because of this such slow clearance. And this is why Nandrolone and Trenbolone exert such strong suppressive effects. They are bypassing normal androgen receptor feedback, and they are instead acting directly on progesterone receptors that influence GnRH pulsatility. And because GnRH is the first step in the mechanism, GnRH down to LH, FSH down to testosterone production at the testicle level, if that very first thing is cut out, GnRH is gone, you are not getting any testosterone natural production at all, and you're going to be suppressed for a lot longer. This is how Nandrolone and Trenbolone are so suppressive. So Tren and Nandrolone are really shutting you down through 3 different vectors: progesterone suppression, the androgen receptor suppression, because we know they bind strongly to androgen receptors as well, but also the fact that the metabolites can stay in your system for so much longer. So in terms of timelines, because I do get men come to me and they'll ask me the question, how long is this going to take to recover to natural? We know now that there are going to be differences depending what you've taken. If you've taken Nandrolone, you may still be suppressed at the 6-month mark and slightly suppressed at the 9-month mark. If you've taken testosterone-based steroids, like say for example you just took a cycle of testosterone and anthate, the actual recovery for full LH restoration in the research is between 3 and 12 months. In most men that I work with, I see baseline levels of LH returning at around the 3 to 4 month mark, and there is a lot less severe suppression as compared to the 19-NOR derivatives or 19-NORs like Trenbolone and Nandrolone. Testosterone-based steroids don't seem to have that suppression. Around 3 months, you'll start to see your LH levels about 4 or 5 IUs per litre. And then of course, we come to the question of, do medications actually help? Depending on what you've taken, PCT can help a lot. For example, if you've taken compounds that heavily convert to estrogen and you have a lot of aromatization going on, for example, something like an AI to reduce that E2 level and stop that estrogen receptor mediated feedback back to the hypothalamus and back to the pituitary gland, can help. If you've been on for a long period of time, like 2 years, and you've got significant testicular atrophy, that's where something like HCG is going to come in. If you've got issues with sperm cell counts, recombinant or RFSH may come in as well. And this study was strong on showing that something like clomiphene therapy alone may take up to 6 months to restore LH to baseline after stopping anabolic steroids. And in severe suppression cases, HCG with RFSH was shown to accelerate recovery, and you could probably reduce the time frame 1 or 2 months, or take off 1 or 2 months off the recovery time frame if you're smart with the medications. And a lot of men are coming to me for coaching for that reason, to actually know the protocol and know what to do depending on what classes of steroids they've taken, because I have men coming to me literally crying, wondering how to actually fix this, or they're emotionally or very anxious, and we need to help them. These men need help just as much as anyone. So your choices in the past don't have to ruin your future, and that is what I tell all the men that I work with. There's no judgment, and I'm here to help you and make a plan if you do want to recover your natural levels, on how to do that as best as possible with the circumstances of the different classes of steroids and how long you've actually taken them. And of course, dosing of what you've done is a massive component of that as well. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Just to recap, so you're understanding what's actually going on when you're putting these compounds into your body. I can't tell you not to do a cycle, but I can educate you on how to do it safely. You just need to understand that testosterone and DHT-based derivatives are going to shut you down in a very different way to the heavily suppressive progestin-based steroids like Trenbolone, like Nandrolone, like Ment. And understanding that you may be dealing with a much tougher recovery if you take those heavily suppressive compounds, up to 6-9 months you're still suppressed after stopping the cycle. Just being aware of that is going to give you more knowledge about how to do this safely. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I will see you in the next video.